All right, so unlike the first project, we're going to be building our own custom API, our own custom backend. In the first project, we used the GitHub API, which is a third-party API that anybody can use. But now we're creating our own API using Node, Express, and MongoDB for our database. So the first thing I want to do is get our database set up. Now, MongoDB is a NoSQL database. It's a document database, which is a certain type of NoSQL database, and it's very JavaScript-like. In fact, it looks like JSON, like JavaScript object notation. So it's pretty easy to understand on a fundamental level. We're not going to get too advanced here. And there's a couple ways that you can use Mongo. You can install it locally on your system, but what we're going to do is use MongoDB Atlas, which is a cloud database. So we can actually host it in the cloud, and then you'll be able to deploy your application anywhere, and you don't have to worry about getting the database set up on your server. So we can use a service like Heroku, for instance. So let's go ahead and get started and create our database. So if you go to mongodb.com, you just want to, well, I'm going to sign in, but you'll want to sign up. So if you go to try free, just fill this out, get started free, and then you'll be able to sign in. So I'm just going to log in here. And it might look a little different if it's a brand new account. It's going to ask you to create a project. You can see I have a couple projects here. I'm in the test project, and then we have to create a cluster. All right, so we're going to say build a cluster, and there's a couple options here. One is the provider and region. So the provider, we're going to use the default, which is AWS. You also have Google Cloud, Azure, but we're going to go with AWS. And everything we do here is completely free, by the way. So my region, I'm going to just keep North Virginia. Cluster tier, you'll see that we're using the free forever, which is this M0 sandbox, which is not ideal for production, but it's perfect for development. So down here, we don't need any additional settings, so we'll leave that. And then as far as the cluster goes, I'm just going to rename this to, let's say, we'll just say contact keeper. We'll just give it the name of the application. So let's create our cluster. Now, this takes a couple minutes to set up. It does say 7 to 10 minutes, but it never really takes that long. It'll probably take about 2 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is pause the video, and I'll be back when this is done. All right, so our cluster has been created, and there's a couple steps we need to take. So first thing we're going to want to do is click on the Security tab, and we're going to want to add a user. We need a user so that we can access the database. So I'm going to click on Add New User. And this has nothing to do with your MongoDB account or anything like that. This is a specific user for this cluster. So I'm just going to use Brad123, and Brad123 is the password. And then you can also have privileges. So I'm going to say that this user can read and write to any database in the cluster. And you can also save it as a temporary user if you wanted to. So let's say add user. And then the next thing is we need to whitelist our IP address. So configure which IP addresses can access your cluster. So if we click add IP address, there's basically two things we can do. We can click on add current IP address. What that'll do is it'll look at the IP address of the machine you're currently on and add that as a whitelist. Or you can access from anywhere, which will allow any IP address. And I'm going to choose this just because I'm not keeping this database. However, I would definitely recommend whitelisting your IP if if this was a production application. Oops, I think I just canceled out. So let's add from anywhere and confirm. All right, so those are the two first steps that you want to do when you're creating a cluster. Now, if we go to overview, and I just want to show you, if we go into collections, this is where we can actually see our data. Now, there is no data here, obviously, but if there was, we could see it here, and we can also add data through this interface, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do that through our application. Now in, let's see, let's go back to right here, and we just want to click on connect and connect to your application. And what this does is it gives us a string that we can use within our application to connect to our database. And this is going to include our username and password. All right, we don't need this just yet, but just to show you that's what we'll be using. Okay, so now our database is set up, really simple. If you want to use a local installation of Mongo, you certainly can download it and install it. It's a little different depending on if you're on Mac, Windows, or Linux, how you install it, but if you want to do that, you can. Okay, so now that we have our database set up, we're going to start to create our application. So in the next video, we're going to install all of our dependencies, including Express, and just get a very basic Express server up and running.